Walter Freeman, 73, watched the police officer count the bills from his wallet, 20, 40, 60, $80. The officer smirked, pocketing the cash. "Drive safely, old man." Neither knew the microscopic trackers embedded in each bill were already transmitting to FBI surveillance vans nearby. Before I dive deeper into this shocking story, let me know where you're watching from in the comments. If this kind of justice story interests you, hit that subscribe button and turn on notifications so you never miss our exposés of corruption and the brave individuals who fight back. Now, let's discover how an elderly man became the unexpected hero in a dangerous game of justice. Walter Freeman was not the kind of man who sought trouble. At 73 years old, the retired postal worker had spent 42 years delivering mail through rain, sleet, and snow in the predominantly black neighborhood of Riverdale, Georgia. Since his beloved wife Corinne passed 3 years ago, Walter had filled his days volunteering at the Riverdale Community Center, teaching chess to neighborhood children and serving as a deacon at First Baptist Church. With his salt and pepper hair always neatly trimmed and his posture still military straight from his Army days, 5 decades earlier, Walter commanded respect throughout the community. Everyone knew Walter Freeman as a man of principle and quiet dignity. Everyone except Officer Brendan Keegan of the Riverdale Police Department. To Officer Keegan, Walter Freeman was simply another target. The first time Officer Keegan pulled Walter over it was supposedly for a broken taillight. Walter knew his 2005 Buick was meticulously maintained, but he nodded respectfully and accepted the $80 fine that Keegan pocketed without providing a receipt. The second time, 3 weeks later, Walter was allegedly 5 miles over the speed limit. Another $70 disappeared from his wallet. By the 8th traffic stop in 3 months, Walter had lost nearly $600 to the officer's roadside justice system. Each encounter followed the same pattern: trivial or non-existent violations, thinly veiled racial comments, and cash disappearing without documentation. Walter remained silent through it all. He had lived through enough history to know that black men who challenged white authority figures often faced consequences far worse than stolen money. But by the 8th stop, financial reality forced Walter's hand. His fixed income couldn't sustain these illegal fines, and he was falling behind on his medications. It was his grandson Marcus who finally convinced him to take action. "Granddad, this isn't the 60s anymore. You have rights, and what this officer is doing is criminal," insisted Marcus, a second-year law student at Emory University. Marcus had noticed his grandfather's increasing anxiety whenever police cars appeared in his rearview mirror and finally extracted the full story during Sunday dinner. The next day, Marcus brought Walter to meet with Jasmine Powell, a civil rights attorney who had made a name for herself challenging police misconduct cases. In Powell's sleek downtown office, Walter nervously recounted each incident, growing more confident as the attorney nodded with increasing indignation. "Mr. Freeman, you're not alone," Powell said, pulling out a folder. "I've received similar complaints from 6 other elderly black residents in Riverdale, all describing the same officer and the same pattern of theft disguised as traffic enforcement." She slid across photographs of Officer Keegan, confirmation that they were indeed talking about the same man. Walter's hands trembled slightly as he pointed to the image. "That's him. Always so smug, like he's untouchable. Unfortunately, he's been operating that way because the local department protects him," Powell explained. "But I think we might have a way to stop him permanently." The following day, Walter and Marcus found themselves in a different office, this one belonging to FBI agent Diana Chen. Agent Chen specialized in police corruption cases and had been quietly building a file on suspicious activities within the Riverdale Police Department. Officer Keegan's name had appeared multiple times, but until now, victims had been too frightened to formally cooperate. "Mr. Freeman," Agent Chen said, her expression serious, "we believe Officer Keegan is part of a larger problem in Riverdale, but we need evidence that will stand up in court. Would you be willing to help us catch him in the act?" Walter's throat tightened. "You mean like bait?" "I'd have to face him again. We would monitor everything, have officers nearby ready to intervene," Chen assured him. "We'd provide you with specially marked bills that would prove theft if recovered from Officer Keegan. The marking is invisible but shows up under special light, and each bill contains microscopic trackers." Walter stared at his weathered hands. For most of his life, he had avoided confrontation with authorities. His parents had raised him to keep his head down, stay out of trouble, and endure injustice quietly because fighting back was too dangerous. But now, at 73, was he finally in a position to make a difference? Marcus squeezed his grandfather's shoulder. "You don't have to do this, Granddad." Walter thought of Eloise Washington from his church, 82 years old, and recently in tears because she couldn't afford her heart medication after being fined by a police officer. He thought of the young men in his neighborhood already targeted enough without corrupt officers adding to their burden. "I'll do it," Walter said finally. "Someone needs to stand up to this man." Over the next week, Walter received careful coaching from Agent Chen and her team. The operation would be meticulously planned. Walter would drive along Officer Keegan's regular patrol route with $80 in specially prepared bills in his wallet. He would carry a hidden recording device disguised as a pen in his shirt pocket, and his car would be fitted with tiny cameras. FBI agents would monitor from unmarked vans positioned strategically along the route. As the day of the operation approached, Agent Chen shared more background on their target. Officer Brendan Keegan was a 12-year veteran of the force, with a spotless official record. Complaints against him had been filed, but mysteriously disappeared. His personnel file contained commendations and a consistent pattern of promotions. Most significantly, he was known to be close to Police Chief Victor Hargrove, with whom he shared hunting trips and family barbecues. "Keegan lives in Oakwood Estates," Chen explained, showing Walter photos of a sprawling house with a pool and boat in the driveway. "Pretty lavish for someone on a police officer's salary, don't you think? We've traced some unusual deposits to offshore accounts, but nothing we can directly connect to his street activities yet." Walter nodded, studying the image of the man who had been terrorizing him and others like him. Officer Keegan's confident smile and departmental photographs revealed a man who believed himself above consequences. The day before the operation, Walter sat in his living room, surrounded by photos of Corinne and their life together. "I wish you were here to tell me if I'm doing the right thing," he whispered to her image. He carefully placed the specially marked bills into his wallet, checking and rechecking that they were positioned visibly when the wallet was opened. That night he barely slept, rehearsing what he would say and do when confronted by Officer Keegan again. By dawn, Walter was exhausted but resolute. He dressed carefully in a crisp, button-down shirt concealing the recording equipment, said a quick prayer, and headed out to his car where Marcus waited to drive him to the staging area. "You sure about this?" Granddad Marcus asked one final time. Walter straightened his shoulders and nodded. "Some things are worth being afraid for," he said, his voice stronger than he felt. "Your grandmother would say, 'It's past time I took a stand.'" The morning air felt unusually thick as Walter settled behind the wheel of his Buick. Agent Chen had spent an hour affixing tiny cameras to the dashboard and rearview mirror, disguising them as ordinary objects. The recording pen felt heavy in Walter's shirt pocket, and the earpiece through which he would receive instructions was uncomfortable. "Testing, Mr. Freeman. Can you hear me clearly?" Agent Chen's voice came through the earpiece. Walter gave a subtle nod, knowing the dashboard camera would catch the movement. "Remember, just drive the route normally. If Officer Keegan pulls you over, behave exactly as you have in previous encounters. Your safety is our priority. If at any point you feel unsafe, use the code word mailbox, and we'll intervene immediately." Walter's hands trembled slightly as he adjusted his rearview mirror. In it, he could see the unmarked FBI van parked half a block behind him. Two more were positioned strategically along the route he would drive, a 3-mile stretch of Maple Avenue, where Officer Keegan frequently patrolled between 9 and 11 in the morning. As Walter pulled away from the curb, memories flooded back from a lifetime of careful navigation around white authority. He remembered his father teaching him at age 10 how to act around police eyes down. Yes, sir, no, sir. No sudden movements. He remembered being 17 and watching his best friend beaten for suspicious behavior that amounted to waiting for a bus after dark. He remembered explaining to his own son, Marcus's father, why he couldn't play with a toy gun in the front yard. And now at 73 here, he was deliberately placing himself in the path of a predator. The first hour passed uneventfully. Walter drove up and down Maple Avenue, occasionally turning onto side streets before returning to the main road. His eyes constantly flicked to the rearview mirror, tensing whenever a police car appeared, but none of them were Officer Keegan's distinctive cruiser with the dent in the rear bumper. No sign of our target, Agent Chen's voice informed him after 90 minutes. We've just received word that Officer Keegan called in sick today. We're going to abort the operation and try again tomorrow. Walter felt a complex mixture of relief and disappointment as he drove to the rendezvous point. The tension drained from his body, leaving him suddenly exhausted. I'm sorry for the wasted effort, Agent Chen said when they regrouped at the FBI's temporary command center. These things happen in operations. Sometimes it takes multiple attempts. Maybe it's a sign I shouldn't be doing this, Walters said quietly. Attorney Powell, who had joined them at the command center, shook her head firmly. Or maybe it's a sign that we need to be more strategic. Let's use this time to gather more information and refine our approach. That afternoon, Walter visited the community center where he volunteered, his mind still preoccupied with the morning's aborted mission. As he set up chessboards for the afternoon youth program, Eloise Washington approached him, her normally cheerful face drawn with worry. Walter, I heard you talking with Attorney Powell last week, she said in a hushed voice. About that officer, the one who takes money. Walter's head snapped up. Eloise, did he stop you too? The elderly woman nodded, tears welling in her eyes. Twice now. Last time was $300, my entire prescription money for the month. Said I made an illegal turn. I didn't, Walter. I've been driving that route to the pharmacy for 20 years. Walter's resolve hardened as he listened to Eloise and later that day 3 other seniors from the community who shared similar stories. By the time he met with Agent Chen and Attorney Powell the next morning, his earlier hesitation had vanished. We need to try again, he insisted. Too many people are suffering because of this man. Agent Chen nodded, pulling out a folder with fresh intelligence. We've learned more about Officer Keegan's patterns. He tends to patrol Maple Avenue on Tuesdays and Thursdays between 10 and noon. And we've discovered something else interesting. He appears to have significant gambling debts. Our financial analysis shows regular payments to known loan sharks in Atlanta. That explains the aggressive targeting, Powell observed. He needs cash, and lots of it. While the team refined their strategy across town, Officer Brendan Keegan was having a tense conversation with his wife in their kitchen. The credit card is maxed out again, Brendan, she said, waving the statement. And there's another call from someone named Vincent. He wouldn't say what it was about, but he sounded threatening. Keegan grabbed the paper from her hand. I told you I'd handle it. Just stay out of my business matters. Later that day, Keegan met his partner, Officer Miguel Rodriguez, for their patrol briefing. Rodriguez, a 10-year veteran who had been paired with Keegan for the past year, had grown increasingly uncomfortable with his partner's behavior. Heard you were sick yesterday, Rodriguez commented casually. Feeling better. Just needed a mental health day, Keegan replied, not meeting his partner's eyes. The stress, you know, Rodriguez nodded slowly. Sure. Hey, did you hear about internal affairs asking questions about traffic stops in our district? Something about complaints from elderly residents. Keegan's face remained impassive, but his knuckles whitened around his coffee cup. Probably nothing. You know how people make things up when they don't want to admit they broke the law? That night, Walter lay awake in bed staring at the ceiling. Images from his youth during the civil rights movement flashed through his mind. The marches he'd been too afraid to join, the voter registration drives where he'd stood on the sidelines. He had always told himself he was being prudent, especially with a family to protect. But now, in the twilight of his life, he wondered if he had simply been a coward. Not this time, he whispered to himself. This time, I stand up. The next morning, Walter prepared more carefully. He chose a light blue shirt that Corinne had always said made him look distinguished. He made sure the marked bills were arranged so they would be immediately visible when he opened his wallet. As Marcus drove him to the staging area, Walter rehearsed what he would say if Keegan asked why he was in the area. Just visiting my friend Eloise, he practiced. Dropping off some chess books for the community center. When Walter took the wheel of his Buick this time, he felt oddly calm. The fear was still there, but underneath it was a steely determination that surprised him. He pulled onto Maple Avenue precisely at 10:15, the time Agent Chen had identified as most likely for Keegan to be patrolling. All units in position, Chen's voice confirmed in his earpiece. Remember, your safety is the priority, Mr. Freeman. We have eyes on you from multiple angles. Walter drove exactly 2 miles under the speed limit, carefully observing every traffic rule. He made sure his turn signals were activated well in advance, came to complete stops at every sign, and kept both hands visible on the steering wheel. 45 minutes into the operation, Chen's voice came through the earpiece with new urgency. Target vehicle spotted approaching from the south. Continuing on your current route, Mr. Freeman. Walter's heart rate spiked, but he maintained his steady pace. In his rearview mirror, he could see the police cruiser several cars back, distinctive with its dented rear bumper. He forced himself to breathe normally as the cruiser pulled out and began to accelerate toward him. The flash of blue lights in his mirror sent a jolt of adrenaline through Walter's system. He carefully signaled and pulled to the curb, going through the motions he had rehearsed dozens of times. As he waited for Officer Keegan to approach, Walter took out his wallet and made sure the edge of the marked bills was visible just as they had planned. The sharp rap of knuckles against Walter's driver's side window made him flinch, despite his mental preparation. He carefully lowered the window, keeping both hands visible on the steering wheel afterward, just as his father had taught him decades ago. Officer Brendan Keegan's face appeared wearing the same smug expression Walter had come to dread. Today, the officer wore mirrored sunglasses that reflected Walter's own anxious face back at him. License and registration, Keegan demanded without preamble or greeting. His voice carried the casual arrogance of someone accustomed to unquestioned authority. "May I ask what I did wrong?" Officer Walter inquired, his voice steady, despite the hammering of his heart. He was acutely aware of the recording devices capturing every word. "You rolled through that stop sign back there at Maple and Elm," Keegan said, the lie flowing easily from his lips. Walter knew with absolute certainty that he had come to a complete stop at that intersection. He had been especially careful given the operation underway. "I'm sure I came to a complete stop, sir," Walter said mildly, not wanting to appear confrontational, but needing to establish the falseness of the accusation for the recording. "Are you calling me a liar, old man?" Keegan's voice dropped dangerously, and he leaned closer to the window. Walter caught a whiff of coffee and cigarettes. "No, sir. Just confused is all." Walter carefully reached for his wallet, moving slowly to retrieve his license. As he opened the wallet, he made sure the arrangement of bills was clearly visible, just as they had rehearsed. He noted Keegan's eyes flicking to the cash before returning to the license. "And where are you headed today, Mr. Freeman?" Keegan asked, studying the license. "Just to the community center. I volunteer there teaching chess to kids," Walter explained, his voice growing more confident as he settled into the role. "And where are you coming from? Home?" "Just from home." Walter watched as Keegan's expression shifted subtly. The questions were unnecessary for a simple traffic violation, and both men knew it. This was the prelude to the real purpose of the stop. "Step out of the car, please," Keegan ordered suddenly. This wasn't part of the script they had rehearsed with Agent Chen. Walter hesitated, his eyes darting to the rearview mirror, where he could just make out the unmarked FBI van in the distance. "Is there a problem, officer? Just step out of the car. Now." The command left no room for negotiation. Walter slowly unbuckled his seatbelt and opened the door, careful to keep his movements deliberate and non-threatening. As he stood, he felt incredibly vulnerable. Keegan was younger, stronger, and armed. The weight of history pressed down on Walter. How many unarmed black men had stepped out of their vehicles during routine traffic stops, never to return home? "Turn around and put your hands on the car," Keegan ordered. Walter complied, feeling the cool metal of the Buick beneath his palms. He wondered if the cameras could still capture what was happening, if Agent Chen was preparing to intervene. "Spread your legs." Keegan kicked Walter's feet further apart, the casual violence of the gesture making Walter wince. Then came the pat down, Keegan's hands rough and invasive as they moved across Walter's body. When Keegan reached the shirt pocket containing the recording pen, Walter held his breath, but the officer moved past it without suspicion. "What do we have here?" Keegan's hand emerged from Walter's back pocket, holding his wallet. Walter remained facing the car as instructed, but he could hear the leather wallet opening behind him. "Carrying quite a bit of cash today, aren't we, Mr. Freeman?" The officer's voice had taken on a deceptively friendly tone that made Walter's skin crawl. "Just for groceries and some supplies for the community center," Walter replied, his mouth dry. There was a pause, and Walter could hear the soft sound of bills being counted. "Well, Mr. Freeman, it seems we have a problem. You see, people often carry cash to make drug purchases. This amount is suspicious." Walter turned his head slightly, just enough to see Keegan pocketing the marked bills. That's my money for the month, sir. I don't do drugs. I'm 73 years old, and I take blood pressure medication. That's it. I'm going to let you off with a warning today about the stop sign, Keegan said, ignoring Walter's protest completely. But I'm confiscating this cash as evidence. You understand, don't you? Just procedure. Walter felt a surge of anger that momentarily overpowered his fear. Don't I get a receipt for that money? Some kind of documentation. Keegan's laugh was short and dismissive. You want paperwork. Sure, I could take you down to the station, book you for resisting arrest, suspected drug activity. That enough paperwork for you? Or would you prefer to get back in your car and drive home safely? The threat hung in the air between them. Walter thought of the FBI agents watching of the operation that needed to succeed. He swallowed his anger and dignity. I understand, officer. Smart man. Get back in your car and drive carefully now. No more rolling through stop signs. Keegan's voice dripped with condescension as he stepped back Walter's $80 now securely in his pocket. With shaking hands, Walter climbed back into the Buick. He watched in the rearview mirror as Keegan returned to his cruiser, typed something briefly into his computer, and then drove away without issuing any ticket or documentation. Target is moving away from your location, Agent Chen's voice confirmed in Walter's earpiece. Operation successful, Mr. Freeman. Proceed to the rendezvous point. Walter's hands trembled on the steering wheel as he pulled back into traffic. A complex mixture of emotions churned inside him. Humiliation at the treatment he'd endured, anger at the injustice, but also a surge of fierce satisfaction, knowing that Keegan had just sealed his own fate. 15 minutes later, Walter pulled into the parking lot of an abandoned strip mall where the FBI's mobile command center was stationed in a nondescript delivery van. As he stepped out of his car, Agent Chen emerged from the van, her face alight with controlled excitement. Mr. Freeman, you did wonderfully, she said, guiding him into the van where several agents huddled around monitoring equipment. We got everything on audio and video, and the tracking devices in the bills are transmitting perfectly. On a computer screen, Walter could see a blinking dot moving along a map of Riverdale. That's him, Walter asked, pointing to the screen. Yes, Chen confirmed. He's stopped at a convenience store now, probably breaking one of the bills. She turned to Walter, her expression serious. How are you feeling? That pat down and the threats weren't part of what we anticipated. Walter sank into a chair, suddenly aware of how drained he felt. I'm okay. It wasn't anything I haven't experienced before. Just been a while, that's all. He rubbed his hands together, trying to stop the lingering tremor. Did we get what we needed? Absolutely, Chen assured him. The recording clearly shows him taking the money without cause or documentation. The marked bills will be irrefutable evidence once we recover them. This is exactly what we needed. While Walter was being debriefed across town, Officer Keegan strolled into a convenience store and purchased a pack of cigarettes and a lottery ticket using one of the $20 bills he had taken from Walter. The clerk accepted it without a second glance, unaware of the invisible markers that would later identify it as evidence. When Keegan returned to his patrol car, he made a brief call. Yeah, another 80 today. Small pickings, but it adds up. I'll make the payment to Vincent on Friday as promised. Back at the FBI command post, Walter watched the tracking dots multiply as Keegan unwittingly spread the marked bills to different locations. Attorney Powell arrived, her face lighting up when Chen briefed her on the successful operation. This is excellent, Mr. Freeman. With this evidence, we can finally stop him. But District Attorney Eleanor Hayes was less enthusiastic when presented with the preliminary evidence that afternoon. A single incident of potential misconduct isn't enough to go after a decorated officer, she argued, in her office, her manner cool and dismissive, especially based on the word of, she glanced at the file, the 73-year-old man, who might have misunderstood the interaction. Agent Chen's frustration was evident. We have it on video with audio. We have the marked bills. This isn't ambiguous. Hayes shrugged. One incident could be explained away. His union rep will say it was a misunderstanding, that the money was actually logged as evidence, but the paperwork hasn't been processed yet. We need more. As Chen left the DA's office, her phone rang. It was Marcus calling with news that he and Powell had located 4 more victims willing to testify about Keegan's pattern of theft. Meanwhile, Walter sat in his living room staring at the space where his $80 had been in his wallet. Despite the success of the operation, he couldn't shake a sense of violation and vulnerability. Would this actually lead to consequences for Keegan? Or would the system protect one of its own, as it had so many times before? If we were in Walter's position, would we have had the courage to stand up to corruption? Comment number 1. If you believe most people would stay silent out of fear. Or number 2, if you think more would fight back like Walter. Don't forget to like this video if you appreciate Walter's bravery, and subscribe to hear how this story unfolds. The FBI has evidence of theft, but will a single incident be enough to bring down a corrupt officer with powerful connections? Let's find out what happens next. Officer Brendan Keegan was not a man accustomed to fear, but the unmarked sedan that had followed him for 3 blocks sent an unfamiliar chill down his spine. After 12 years on the force, he had developed a sixth sense for surveillance. Twice he had made unexpected turns, and twice the sedan had appeared moments later. Too coincidental to ignore. When he finally lost the tail and pulled into the parking lot behind the Riverdale Police Department, his first call was to Chief Victor Hargrove. "Chief, we need to talk." Not on the phone. 20 minutes later, Keegan sat in Hargrove's wood-paneled office, the door firmly closed, and voices kept low. Chief Hargrove, a heavy-set man with 30 years on the force and political connections throughout the county, leaned back in his leather chair with a deep frown. "You're sure it was surveillance? Could have been coincidence." Keegan shook his head. "My instincts say federal, too professional for local. And I've heard rumors about internal affairs asking questions about traffic stops in our district." Hargrove's frown deepened. "Any particular stops that might have attracted attention?" The implied question hung in the air. Keegan hesitated. Nothing stands out, just the usual enforcement. Both men understood the euphemism. Hargrove sighed heavily, reaching for his phone. "Let me make some calls. In the meantime, keep your activities strictly by the book. No exceptions." The impact of that conversation rippled outward like stones thrown into a pond. By the following morning, District Attorney Eleanor Hayes received a phone call from the police union president, reminding her of their endorsement during her last campaign and expressing concerns about witch hunts targeting officers based on unsubstantiated complaints from unreliable witnesses. Hayes, who had political ambitions beyond the DA's office, understood the implicit threat. When Agent Chen called to follow up on their conversation, Hayes was noticeably cooler. "I've reviewed the case again, and I'm not convinced it meets our threshold for prosecution. Perhaps administrative discipline would be more appropriate." Chen's frustration was palpable. Administrative discipline for theft under color of authority. For targeting elderly black citizens, this is exactly the kind of case your office promised to prioritize during your campaign. Hayes' voice turned brittle. "I don't appreciate the implication, Agent Chen. My office will make determinations based on legal merit, not political pressure from federal agencies overstepping their jurisdiction." The conversation ended with neither woman satisfied, and both aware that battle lines were being drawn. That same afternoon, Walter Freeman received the first anonymous phone call. He had just returned from the community center when his landline rang. When he answered, the voice was disguised, but the message was clear. "Stop making trouble for the police, old man, or you'll regret it." Walter's hand trembled as he placed the receiver back in its cradle. He had known there would be risks in challenging the system, but the reality of threats entering his home shook him deeply. He hadn't yet told Marcus about the call when his grandson arrived that evening, his normally confident expression clouded with confusion. "Granddad, something weird happened. The law journal internship I applied for, the one Professor Wilson personally recommended me for, they rejected me today. Wilson can't understand it. He said it was practically guaranteed." Walter felt a cold knot form in his stomach. The coincidence seemed too precise to be accident. The following day brought more evidence that forces were mobilizing against them. Jasmine Powell arrived at her office to find the front window shattered and racial slurs spray-painted across the walls. Nothing was stolen, making the message clear. This was intimidation, not robbery. The police officers who responded took statements but seemed skeptical when Powell suggested the vandalism might be connected to the Keegan investigation. Probably just random gang activity, one officer commented, despite the office being in a low-crime business district with no history of gang presence. Walter's troubles continued when the director of the community center called him distressed. "Walter, we've been hit with 3 code violations overnight. The inspector said we have to close until they're addressed." He mentioned something about fire exits not being up to code, but those exits haven't changed in 20 years, and we passed inspection just 2 months ago. Walter listened with growing anger, recognizing the pattern forming around them. He wasn't surprised when he returned home that evening to find his front door slightly ajar. His heart pounding, he called Marcus before entering, waiting in his car until his grandson arrived with Agent Chen, who happened to be meeting with him when the call came. They entered cautiously. Nothing appeared to be stolen, but Walter's belongings had been systematically searched: drawers, left open, books pulled from shelves. The violation of his home, his sanctuary, left Walter shaken in a way that even the confrontation with Keegan had not. "They're sending a message," Agent Chen said grimly, photographing the disarray. "This is how corrupt systems operate. They make it clear that opposing them has consequences." Walter sank into his armchair, suddenly feeling every one of his 73 years. Maybe this was a mistake. I didn't think about how it might affect Marcus, the community center, everyone around me. Marcus knelt beside his grandfather's chair. "This isn't on you, Granddad. This is on them. They're proving exactly why they need to be stopped." The next day brought another blow. 2 of the witnesses who had agreed to testify about Keegan's pattern of theft called Powell to withdraw. "I'm sorry," one elderly woman explained, her voice quavering. "My son got pulled over twice yesterday." The officers mentioned how concerned they were about his mother getting involved in unnecessary trouble. "I can't risk my family." By week's end, only Walter and one other witness remained willing to testify. The pressure extended to Agent Chen as well. Her supervisor called her into his office with an unexpected announcement. "We're reassigning you to the Bank Fraud Task Force in Savannah, effective Monday." Chen stared in disbelief. "Sir, I'm in the middle of a critical police corruption investigation." The supervisor avoided meeting her eyes. "The reassignment comes from the regional director. Apparently your expertise is urgently needed on a major fraud case." Chen recognized the maneuver for what it was. Someone with influence had made a phone call. She left the office seething, but determined. If she only had until Monday, she would make every hour count. While the official investigation faced mounting obstacles, Marcus had been conducting research of his own. As a law student with access to legal databases, he had been digging into property records and city development plans. When he and Powell connected the dots, a disturbing pattern emerged. The properties where elderly black homeowners are being targeted for harassment form a cluster in what's designated as Phase 1 of the Riverdale Renaissance development, Marcus explained, spreading maps across Powell's desk. "And guess who's on the board of the development company? Police Chief Hargrove's brother-in-law." Powell nodded grimly. "And the company has made generous contributions to DA Hayes' last 2 campaigns. The harassment isn't random, it's strategic. Force people to sell cheaply or face constant police intimidation." Armed with this information, journalist Cameron Wright agreed to investigate for the local independent newspaper. Wright had built a reputation for fearless reporting on corruption, and the potential connection between police harassment and development interests piqued his professional instincts. "I'll need to verify independently," he cautioned when they met in a coffee shop far from Riverdale. "But if what you're saying is true, this goes beyond one corrupt cop. This is systemic." While Wright began his investigation, Walter faced growing isolation within his own community. At Sunday service, several church members who had greeted him warmly for decades now avoided his eyes or moved to different pews. After the service, Deacon Williams pulled him aside. "Walter, I respect what you're trying to do, but people are scared. The police have a long reach in this town. Some folks are worried about association." Walter understood their fear, but felt the sting of abandonment nonetheless. He walked home alone, his usual Sunday dinner companions having made excuses. As he approached his house, Walter noticed a police cruiser parked across the street. Not Keegan's, but the message was clear. He was being watched. Inside, he found an envelope that had been pushed under his door. No return address, no postmark. With trembling fingers, he opened it to find a single sheet of paper with 4 words typed in the center: Deed men can't testify. Walter stared at the explicit threat, the paper shaking in his hand. For the first time since beginning this journey, he wondered if he would live to see its conclusion. Can you imagine receiving a death threat simply for standing up against corruption? Comment number 1. If you think Walter should continue despite the dangers. Or number 2, if you believe the risks have become too great. Like this video if you admire those who fight for justice against all odds, and subscribe to see how Walter responds to these escalating threats. With powerful forces aligned against them and support dwindling, how can Walter and his allies possibly prevail? The conspiracy appears to run deeper than anyone imagined. Agent Diana Chen had never been one to follow orders that compromised justice. Her official reassignment to Savannah wasn't scheduled to take effect until Monday, giving her precisely 56 hours to gather enough evidence to make the case impossible to bury. Operating without official authorization, she commandeered a small team of trusted colleagues who shared her disgust with the interference in their investigation. This goes beyond one officer stealing from citizens. Chen explained as they gathered in a hotel room converted into a makeshift command center. The pattern suggests systematic targeting of elderly black homeowners in specific neighborhoods. We need to find the connection. While Chen's team analyzed financial records and property transactions, Walter Freeman faced a difficult decision. The death threat had shaken him deeply, but something had awakened in him that refused to be silenced again. When Marcus found him that evening, Walter was methodically organizing photos and notes from each encounter with Officer Keegan. "Granddad, we can find another way," Marcus said, gently eyeing the threatening note with alarm. "No one would blame you for stepping back after this." Walter's weathered hands continued sorting papers with surprising steadiness. "I've stepped back my whole life, Marcus. Kept quiet when I should have spoken. Walked away when I should have stood firm. Not this time." He looked up, his eyes clear and determined. "But I need your help gathering the others who were robbed. Together, we're stronger than alone." The next morning, Walter hosted an unusual gathering in his living room. 6 elderly residents, including Eloise Washington, sat nervously drinking coffee as Walter explained his plan. "They want us isolated and afraid. But we're not alone, and we won't be silenced." One by one, each person shared their story of being stopped, harassed, and robbed by Officer Keegan or other Riverdale officers. As they spoke, fear gave way to indignation, then to resolve. By the time Attorney Powell arrived to document their statements, all 6 had committed to standing with Walter regardless of consequences. "What they're doing isn't just illegal," Eloise said firmly, her earlier tears replaced by determination. "It's evil, using a badge to prey on seniors who worked hard all our lives. Not on my watch." Across town, Officer Miguel Rodriguez sat in his patrol car wrestling with his conscience. For months he had observed his partner's behavior with growing unease. The unexplained cash, the targeting of vulnerable citizens, the protection from higher-ups when complaints surfaced. When he'd cautiously raised concerns, Keegan had laughed it off. "Just cleaning up the streets my way. You're too soft, Rodriguez." But the pressure on elderly black residents had intensified recently, and Rodriguez couldn't ignore the pattern. His family had faced discrimination too often for him to stand by while a badge was used to terrorize the vulnerable. Making his decision, Rodriguez drove to the federal building and asked to speak with someone from the FBI about police corruption. He was directed to a junior agent, covering for Chen, and within an hour, a secure meeting was arranged. "I can't provide official documents," Rodriguez explained nervously, "but I can tell you which cases to look at, which traffic stops weren't logged correctly, and which officers are involved beyond Keegan." The information Rodriguez provided expanded the investigation's scope dramatically. It wasn't just Keegan. At least 4 other officers were involved in systematic harassment, focused primarily on neighborhoods outlined in the Riverdale Renaissance Development Plan. Meanwhile, journalist Cameron Wright published his first article in the Riverdale Independent, carefully worded to avoid libel but raising pointed questions about the correlation between police activity and property sales in certain neighborhoods. The article included statistics on the disproportionate number of traffic stops involving elderly black residents and the subsequent decrease in property values where harassment was most intense. The public reaction was immediate and divided. Comments flooded the newspaper's website, split largely along racial lines. Many white residents defended the police and questioned the data, while black residents and some allies shared additional accounts of harassment. Community organizers began planning a demonstration outside the police department. Walter, reading the article at his kitchen table, felt a mix of validation and apprehension. The truth was emerging, but the backlash would be fierce. His prediction proved accurate the following morning when he arrived at First Baptist Church for Sunday service. Pastor Green asked to speak with him privately before the service. "Walter, I respect what you're doing." The pastor began, his discomfort evident, but several prominent members have expressed concerns about the church being dragged into a political controversy. Some are threatening to withhold donations. Walter had attended First Baptist for 47 years. He had helped rebuild after the fire of 1983, had served as deacon for 2 decades. Now he was being treated as a liability. "I understand," Pastor Walter said quietly. "Would you prefer I worship elsewhere for a while?" The pastor's relief was painful to witness. "Just until this situation resolves. We're praying for you, Walter." The rejection stung deeply, but as Walter left the church that had been his spiritual home for nearly half a century, memories surfaced of his youth during the civil rights movement. How many churches had eventually found their courage back then, after initial hesitation? Perhaps history would repeat itself. The setback at church was balanced by progress in the investigation. Marcus had managed to access the city planning database through a classmate's internship credentials. Late that night, he discovered files that had been modified to change zoning designations for certain properties, all in neighborhoods where harassment had been reported. They're manipulating property values through intimidation, then changing zoning to allow commercial development, Marcus explained to Powell. It's coordinated corruption on multiple levels. Powell immediately filed for emergency warrants based on this new evidence, finding a sympathetic judge willing to review the case despite weekend hours. While Walter's team made progress, Agent Chen brought in additional FBI resources without official authorization, calling in favors from colleagues who shared her commitment to justice. By Sunday evening, surveillance had been established on Chief Hargrove Officer Keegan and 3 other officers identified by Rodriguez. The surveillance quickly paid dividends when Keegan was observed meeting with a man identified as Vincent Calabrese, a known loan shark with ties to organized crime. The recorded exchange of cash confirmed Rodriguez's claim about Keegan's gambling debts. On Monday morning, as Chen was meant to be driving to Savannah for her reassignment, Walter was admitted to Riverdale Memorial Hospital with chest pains. The stress of recent events had aggravated his existing heart condition. Marcus found his grandfather pale and connected to monitoring equipment, but still mentally sharp. "Just a warning sign," Walter insisted, though the doctor had used the term minor cardiac event. "I'm not checking out before we finish this." While Walter recovered, the community response to Wright's article continued to grow. A small protest formed outside the police department, led primarily by younger activists, but gradually joined by older residents, emboldened by seeing others take a stand. Signs bearing slogans like "Protect Seniors, Not Corruption" and "Badge Ter License to Steal" appeared on the evening news. Chief Hargrove responded with a press conference dismissing the allegations as unfounded attacks on hardworking officers and promising an internal review that would clear the department's good name. But the chief's confident demeanor faltered when a reporter asked specifically about the connection between targeted enforcement and the Riverdale Renaissance Development Project. The unexpected question suggested someone was leaking information beyond what had appeared in Wright's article. The following day brought a significant setback. A suspicious fire broke out in the Municipal Records Department, destroying files related to property transactions and police complaints from the past 3 years. The official explanation cited electrical problems, but the timing was too convenient to be coincidence. "They're destroying evidence," Powell said grimly when she heard the news. But they wouldn't take such a drastic step unless they were desperate. That evening, Walter returned home from the hospital against medical advice, insisting he would recover better in familiar surroundings. Marcus arranged for a home health aide and installed additional security cameras around the property. Despite these precautions, Walter awoke at 3 a.m. to the sound of breaking glass. Looking out his bedroom window, he saw his car with smashed windows and a message spray-painted across the hood, "Race Traitor." The vandalism was accompanied by a crude racial slur. When police responded, their cursory investigation and suggestion that it was probably just teenagers only confirmed Walter's suspicion that the harassment was officially sanctioned. But the perpetrators had miscalculated. Far from intimidating Walter into silence, the escalating tactics only strengthened his resolve and provided additional evidence of coordination. The community response shifted too. Neighbors who had kept their distance now appeared at Walter's door with food offers of assistance and their own stories of police harassment. What had been one man's stand was evolving into a community movement. Meanwhile, Marcus made a breakthrough discovery. Keegan's gambling losses at an underground casino operated by Vincent Calabrese were being covered by regular payments from a shell company connected to the Riverdale Renaissance development. The officer wasn't just stealing to cover gambling debts. He was essentially on the payroll of the developers, creating a direct link between his harassment of residents and the planned development. Armed with this information, Agent Chen convinced her superiors to authorize a formal expansion of the investigation, arguing that the evidence now suggested organized criminal activity beyond simple police corruption. Additional agents were assigned and surveillance intensified. As Walter recovered his strength, a knock at his door one evening revealed Officer Keegan himself alone and unsmiling. "We need to talk, old man," he said, pushing his way inside without waiting for an invitation. The confrontation Walter had feared had arrived at his doorstep with no allies nearby to intervene. The door closed behind Officer Keegan with an ominous click. Walter stood his ground in the center of his living room, acutely aware of the recording app Marcus had installed on his phone, now capturing every word from his pocket. "You've caused quite a stir," Mr. Freeman, Keegan said, removing his sunglasses to reveal bloodshot eyes. The officer looked uncharacteristically disheveled, his uniform wrinkled and his movements tense. "I'm just seeking justice," Walter replied, keeping his voice steady despite the rapid drumming of his heart. "For myself and others you've victimized." Keegan laughed, a harsh sound without humor. "Justice? You have no idea what you've stepped into. This goes way beyond a few dollars taken during traffic stops." He paced the small living room like a caged animal. "You think I'm the problem. I'm just the visible face. There are people with real power behind this operation. People who won't hesitate to bury you and anyone helping you." Walter maintained eye contact, determined not to show fear. "Are you threatening me in my own home, officer? I'm warning you." Keegan corrected, his voice dropping. "Things are going to get much worse unless you back off. Sign a statement that you were confused about our interactions, that no money was taken, and this all goes away. Otherwise—" He left the threat unfinished but glanced meaningfully at the family photos on Walter's mantel, including several of Marcus. The implication was unmistakable. After Keegan left, Walter immediately called Agent Chen, who sent agents to take his statement and retrieve the recording. The encounter confirmed their suspicions about pressure from above, but raised the stakes dramatically. "He's scared," Chen observed after listening to the recording. "His masters are probably squeezing him as the investigation heats up." The following morning brought news that shook the entire investigation to its core. District Attorney Eleanor Hayes called a press conference to announce that, after careful review of the evidence, her office had found insufficient grounds to pursue charges against any Riverdale police officers. "While we take all allegations of misconduct seriously," Hayes stated, her eyes never quite meeting the cameras, "we must distinguish between actual wrongdoing and misunderstandings that can occur during legitimate law enforcement activities." The betrayal was stunning, but not entirely unexpected. Agent Chen had suspected Hayes might be compromised, but the brazenness of the announcement suggested confidence that the federal investigation could also be derailed. That confidence was explained hours later when Chen received a call from her supervisor. "The evidence against Officer Keegan has been compromised," he informed her tersely. "Someone accessed the secure storage facility last night. The marked bills and recording devices are missing. The security cameras had malfunctioned during the precise window when the theft occurred, too convenient to be coincidence." Chen was immediately removed from the investigation pending an internal review of evidence handling protocols. With both local and federal cases apparently derailed, Walter and the other victims received official letters informing them that their complaints had been dismissed due to insufficient evidence and credibility concerns. The letter from the DA's office included thinly veiled language suggesting that false accusations against police officers could themselves be prosecutable offenses. Marcus was furious when he saw the letter. This is blatant intimidation. They're threatening victims for reporting crimes. His anger turned to strategic thinking as he consulted with Powell. There has to be another angle we can pursue. If the criminal case is blocked, what about civil remedies? But Powell herself was fighting for her professional survival. Anonymous complaints had been filed with the State Bar Association alleging ethical violations including witness coaching and evidence manipulation. Though baseless, the complaints would require months to resolve and cast a shadow over any cases she pursued. They're attacking from every angle, Powell explained grimly, trying to isolate each of us and undermine our credibility. The newspaper that had published Wright's expose was facing similar pressure. Major advertisers had suddenly withdrawn, citing controversial editorial decisions, and the publisher was wavering in his support for continued investigation of the Riverdale Renaissance Project. Wright was determined to continue but acknowledged the financial reality. We might have one more major story before management pulls the plug. We need to make it count. While his allies struggled against mounting opposition, Walter's health deteriorated further. The stress of Keegan's threats and the system's betrayal triggered another cardiac episode more serious than the first. Marcus found his grandfather unconscious on the kitchen floor when he arrived for their regular Sunday dinner. At the hospital, doctors confirmed that Walter had suffered a minor heart attack. He needs complete rest and minimal stress, the cardiologist advised Marcus. Another episode could be fatal at his age. Lying in the hospital bed, connected to monitors and IV lines, Walter looked smaller and more fragile than Marcus had ever seen him. But when his grandfather's eyes opened, the fierce determination remained undiminished. "We're not finished," Walter whispered, gripping Marcus's hand with surprising strength. "They wouldn't be fighting this hard if we weren't close to something important." Despite medical advice, Walter's hospital room soon became an unofficial headquarters for their continued resistance. Eloise Washington and the other victims gathered daily, bringing food and companionship, along with new information gathered from their networks in the community. Wright visited after hours, sharing updates on his investigation and collecting new leads. Even Rodriguez made a brief nervous appearance, providing a thumb drive with internal police scheduling information before disappearing again. The combined information began to reveal a pattern more disturbing than they had initially suspected. The Riverdale Renaissance Project was just one facet of a larger operation, targeting historically black neighborhoods across the county. The same development company, operating under different names, had employed similar tactics in 3 other communities, always with local police as the enforcement arm of their strategy. As Walter recovered enough to sit up and participate more actively in the discussions, a new potential ally emerged from an unexpected quarter. An anonymous police source. Clearly Rodriguez, though he used electronic means to conceal his identity, leaked internal communications to Wright showing that multiple officers beyond Keegan were directly involved in the harassment campaign. More significantly, the documents included bank records showing payments from shell companies to these officers, creating a paper trail of corruption. The leak brought severe consequences. Chief Hargrove announced an internal investigation into the unauthorized disclosure of confidential departmental information and suspended 3 officers, including Rodriguez, on suspicion of disloyalty. The message to other potential whistleblowers was clear, but the public narrative was beginning to shift. Wright's latest article, published despite management pressure, detailed the financial connections between the development company, the suspended officers, and campaign contributions to key officials, including D.A. Hayes. Social media amplified the story beyond the newspaper's dwindling readership, attracting attention from larger media outlets and civil rights organizations. A national police accountability group announced they would be sending observers to Riverdale. While still confined to his hospital bed, Walter recorded a powerful video statement describing his experiences. The unvarnished testimony from a 73-year-old man speaking from a hospital bed, his voice occasionally faltering, but his dignity intact, resonated with viewers in a way that statistics and allegations never could. The video, posted by Marcus, accumulated over 100,000 views in 24 hours, and was picked up by several national news outlets. Suddenly, what had been a local issue became part of the national conversation about police reform and racial justice. The increased scrutiny brought an unexpected development. The FBI's national office, responding to growing public and political pressure, announced a formal review of the case and assigned a new team of agents from outside the local field office. Agent Chen, though still officially suspended, was consulted informally due to her knowledge of the case. The momentum shift was palpable. Walter, against medical advice but with a nurse's reluctant assistance, checked himself out of the hospital to attend a community protest organized in his honor. Emerging from Marcus's car to a crowd of supporters wearing Justice for Walter t-shirts, the elderly man stood straight and raised his hand in acknowledgement. The cheers lifted his spirit and strengthened his resolve. Watching from across the street, Chief Hargrove realized that the situation had spiraled beyond his control. His political allies were distancing themselves, unwilling to be associated with a growing scandal. Even the developers had gone silent, their lawyers citing ongoing review of project parameters to explain the sudden communication gap. Do you believe there are more Walter Freemans out there? Everyday heroes standing up against corruption despite overwhelming odds? Comment number 1. If you think Walter's story represents countless untold struggles for justice, or number 2, if you believe his courage is truly exceptional. Like this video if you're inspired by Walter's refusal to back down despite his health challenges and the powerful forces aligned against him. Subscribe to see how this community rises up to support their champion in his darkest hour. With Walter's health failing and official channels compromised, what possible path to justice remains? The betrayal by those meant to uphold the law cuts deep, but Walter's unwavering spirit continues to inspire a movement. The national attention that Walter's video garnered produced results with stunning swiftness. Within 48 hours, the director of the FBI had personally ordered a comprehensive review of the case. A special investigative team arrived from Washington, led by Senior Agent Lawrence Washington, a veteran with a reputation for absolute integrity and a specialization in public corruption cases. Agent Chen was officially reinstated and appointed as liaison to the special team, her earlier suspension now characterized as a routine administrative review. The reversal of fortune continued when an anonymous source provided Wright with extensive financial records, showing a complex web of transactions connecting the Riverdale Renaissance development to offshore accounts linked to Chief Hargrove and several city officials. The evidence had apparently been compiled by someone with inside access to banking information. Rumors suggested a whistleblower within the development company itself, possibly fearing eventual scapegoating. Armed with this new evidence, the FBI executed simultaneous search warrants at the police department, Chief Hargrove's residence, and the offices of the development company. The precision of the operation left no time for evidence destruction. Computers, phones, and documents were seized in significant quantities, and several officers were detained for questioning. Keegan, arriving for his shift to find federal agents throughout the building, attempted to leave, but was intercepted in the parking lot. Agent Chen had the satisfaction of personally informing him that several of the marked bills from Walter's wallet had been traced through the banking system directly back to his personal accounts. "Microscopic trackers don't lie, Officer Keegan," she informed him, as he was escorted to a waiting federal vehicle, "and neither do the serial numbers we recorded." Walter, watching the news coverage from his living room with Marcus and Eloise, felt a complex mixture of vindication and disbelief. For so much of his life, he had witnessed the system protect its own. To see actual consequences unfolding was almost difficult to process. "It's really happening," he murmured, his voice thick with emotion. "They're actually being held accountable." Marcus squeezed his grandfather's shoulder. "Because you stood up when it would have been easier to stay silent. You started all of this." The momentum continued to build throughout the week. Mayor Richard Wilson held an emergency press conference to announce that his office had no prior knowledge of any improper activities and was fully cooperating with federal investigators. The carefully worded statement was a transparent attempt to distance himself from the growing scandal, particularly as records emerged showing he had personally approved key zoning changes benefiting the development project. District Attorney Hayes faced the most immediate consequences. The state attorney general announced an investigation into her handling of police misconduct complaints, and the State Bar Association opened an ethics inquiry. Facing mounting pressure, Hayes took an indefinite leave of absence, effectively ending her political career. A special prosecutor was appointed to review all cases involving the officers under investigation. Powell seized the opportunity to file a comprehensive civil rights lawsuit on behalf of Walter and the other victims. With the criminal investigation providing substantial evidence of a conspiracy, the civil case gained immediate traction. The federal judge assigned to the case expedited the proceedings, citing the advanced age of many plaintiffs and the significant public interest. Walter's health began to improve as the stress of fighting a seemingly impossible battle gave way to the satisfaction of witnessing justice in action. His doctor noted with surprise that his blood pressure had stabilized and his cardiac readings showed improvement. "Whatever you're doing, keep doing it," the cardiologist advised. "Your heart seems to be responding well to recent developments." Marcus, whose law school career had been threatened by the mysterious rejection of his internship application, received an unexpected email from the dean. "In light of your exemplary work on a matter of significant public interest," the message read, "we would like to offer you a position with our civil rights clinic." It became clear that as the power structure that had opposed them crumbled, many institutions were rushing to align themselves with the prevailing winds of accountability. The Riverdale Renaissance Project was officially suspended, pending the outcome of multiple investigations. Property owners who had sold under pressure were contacted about potential restitution, and the City Council announced a review of all development approvals from the past 5 years. Officer Rodriguez, vindicated by the turn of events, was reinstated with back pay and commended for his ethical stand. Several other officers, seeing the direction of the investigation, began cooperating with authorities, trading information for leniency. The domino effect reached Chief Hargrove when financial forensics revealed offshore accounts containing far more money than his salary could explain. Faced with overwhelming evidence, Hargrove's attorney began negotiating a plea deal that would require him to provide information about higher-level participants in the corruption scheme. At a community meeting held in the Riverdale Community Center, Walter was surprised to find himself treated as something of a local hero. Residents who had earlier avoided him now approached to shake his hand or offer thanks. Even Pastor Green from First Baptist Church made an appearance, extending a somewhat awkward invitation for Walter to return to the congregation. "The church should have stood with you from the beginning," the pastor admitted. "We failed in our moral obligation to support justice." Walter accepted the apology with grace, understanding the pressures that had influenced the church's earlier position. The community's support manifested in practical ways as well. When Walter mentioned during an interview that his car had been vandalized beyond repair, a local dealership offered a replacement vehicle at no cost. The community center where he volunteered received an influx of donations earmarked for expanding its youth programs. What had begun as one man's stand against injustice was transforming the entire community's sense of agency and possibility. Even as the case progressed favorably, however, pockets of resistance remained. Officers loyal to Hargrove made their resentment known through small acts of intimidation. Patrol cars would park outside Walter's home for hours, or drive by repeatedly during the night with lights flashing. Anonymous callers would dial his number and hang up immediately. More concerning was information from Rodriguez that some officers had discussed more direct retaliation. "Not everyone is happy about how this is playing out," he warned during a confidential meeting with Walter Marcus and Agent Chen. "Some of the old guards see this as a betrayal of the Brotherhood. I'd suggest taking security precautions." The warning proved prescient when Walter's home was targeted in what was clearly meant to be an arson attack. A neighbor walking his dog late at night observed 2 men in dark clothing pouring liquid around the foundation of the house and called 911 immediately. The responding officers, thankfully not aligned with Hargrove's faction, arrived quickly enough to prevent the fire from being set. Though the perpetrators escaped security cameras, Marcus had installed captured partial images that Rodriguez identified as belonging to officers from a specialized unit known for their absolute loyalty to Hargrove. The attempted arson transformed the community's support into active protection. Neighbors organized a rotating watch schedule, ensuring that Walter's home was under constant observation. Local veterans formed an impromptu security detail patrolling the block in shifts. When federal authorities offered to relocate Walter to a safe house until the trial, he declined firmly. "This is my home. I won't be driven from it by intimidation." Besides, he added with a small smile, "I seem to have acquired quite a security team." The standoff between corrupt officers and community protectors created tensions throughout Riverdale, but an unexpected development shifted the balance further. A group of younger officers led by Rodriguez publicly broke with the old guard and issued a statement supporting the reforms triggered by the investigation. "We became police officers to serve our communities with honor, not to participate in or enable corruption," their statement read. "We stand with the citizens of Riverdale in demanding accountability at all levels." The declaration created a clear division within the department between reform-minded officers and those clinging to the corrupt status quo. When Chief Hargrove was formally arrested and led from his home in handcuffs, the symbolic transfer of power was complete. An interim chief was appointed from outside the department with a mandate to implement comprehensive reforms. As the federal case against Keegan Hargrove and their conspirators took shape, Walter was called to provide depositions and review evidence. Despite the continuing demands on his time and energy, his health continued to improve. "You've found your purpose," Eloise told him during one of their regular chess games. "That's powerful medicine for the soul." Walter considered her words as he moved his bishop. "I never thought of myself as an activist or a fighter. I just reached a point where I couldn't walk away from what was right." Eloise captured his knight with a triumphant smile. "That's exactly what makes you a hero, Walter. Not looking for the role, but accepting it when it found you." The federal courthouse in Atlanta was packed beyond capacity on the opening day of United States v. Keegan et al. News vans lined the street outside, and demonstrators carrying signs about police accountability filled the plaza. Walter Freeman, dressed in his best suit with a blue tie Corinne had given him for their 40th anniversary, walked up the courthouse steps flanked by Marcus and Attorney Powell. His steady gait and straight posture belied the anxiety churning inside him. Today, he would testify before a jury about experiences he had spent a lifetime trying to avoid. Confrontations with authority, racial humiliation, systemic injustice. Inside the imposing courtroom, Walter took his seat in the witness waiting area, watching as the defendants were brought in. Officer Keegan, now suspended, and in civilian clothes, avoided eye contact. Chief Hargrove, similarly stripped of his uniform and authority, stared straight ahead with a rigid jaw. 6 other defendants, 4 police officers, the lead developer Martin Reynolds, and former DA Hayes, completed the group facing federal charges, including conspiracy, civil rights violations, extortion, and obstruction of justice. U.S. Attorney Caroline Phillips opened the government's case with a comprehensive overview of the conspiracy. "This case," she told the attentive jury, "represents one of the most egregious abuses of power and betrayals of public trust this district has ever seen." What began as seemingly isolated incidents of theft by a single officer revealed itself as a coordinated campaign to intimidate and disenfranchise an entire community based on race and economic vulnerability. When Walter was finally called to testify, he moved to the witness stand with deliberate dignity. After being sworn in, he faced the courtroom, his eyes briefly meeting Marcus's for reassurance. "Mr. Freeman," Attorney Phillips began, "could you please tell the court about your first encounter with Officer Keegan?" Walter's voice, initially soft, grew stronger as he recounted the traffic stops, the manufactured violations, the money taken, without receipts or process. He described the humiliation of being ordered out of his car, the fear when Keegan's hand rested casually on his service weapon, the helplessness of watching his money disappear into the officer's pocket. "And why did you eventually decide to report these incidents?" Phillips asked. Walter paused, gathering his thoughts. "I was raised to avoid trouble with authorities. My parents lived through times when challenging a white officer could mean death. They taught me to keep my head down, to endure. And for most of my life, that's what I did." He looked directly at the jury now. "But there comes a point where enduring becomes enabling. When I heard that my friend Eloise couldn't afford her heart medication because an officer took her money, I realized my silence was allowing others to be harmed. At 73, I finally understood that some risks are necessary if justice is ever to mean anything." The cross-examination by Keegan's defense attorney was aggressive, attempting to portray Walter as confused, vindictive, or politically motivated. The attorney emphasized Walter's age, suggesting memory issues might explain the allegations. "Isn't it possible, Mr. Freeman, that you simply misunderstood the nature of these encounters? That perhaps Officer Keegan was explaining legitimate citations rather than demanding money?" Walter leaned slightly forward. "Young man, I may be 73, but I know the difference between a legal traffic stop and a shakedown. When an officer puts your money in his pocket instead of writing a receipt, there's no misunderstanding possible." The courtroom erupted in murmurs, and even some of the jurors couldn't suppress small smiles at the direct response. Over the next 3 days, the jury heard from other victims whose stories echoed Walter's with disturbing consistency. Eloise Washington described being unable to afford her medication after Keegan took $300 during an invented traffic violation. 80-year-old James Turner recounted being made to stand in the rain while Keegan searched his car, eventually taking the $200 Turner had just withdrawn for his grandchild's birthday. Each testimony built upon the last, creating a comprehensive picture of systematic predation. Agent Chen provided technical testimony about the marked bills operation, explaining how the trackers had followed Keegan's spending patterns after he took Walter's money. Financial experts detailed the complex money trail connecting the police department, the development company, and various officials. Officer Rodriguez's testimony proved particularly damaging as he described the internal culture that protected corrupt officers and the explicit instructions from Chief Hargrove to target specific neighborhoods for aggressive enforcement. On the fourth day, the defense began presenting its case. The strategy quickly became clear: admit to individual wrongdoing while denying any broader conspiracy. Keegan's attorney portrayed him as a troubled officer with gambling problems who had acted alone without direction from superiors. "My client acknowledges his failures," the attorney conceded, "but the prosecution's allegations of a vast conspiracy are simply not supported by the evidence." Chief Hargrove's defense took a different approach, claiming complete ignorance of his officers' activities. "The chief oversees hundreds of officers and cannot be held responsible for the unauthorized actions of individuals who concealed their misconduct," his attorney argued. The most dramatic moment came when Hargrove himself took the stand, his previous confidence now replaced with a carefully crafted humility. "I failed in my oversight responsibilities," he admitted, "but I never instructed any officer to target citizens based on race or any other factor." The performance might have been convincing, if not for the mountain of evidence contradicting his claims. Documents showed he had personally reassigned officers to neighborhoods targeted for development. His financial records revealed payments coinciding with property acquisitions in those same areas. Phone records demonstrated regular contact with the developers immediately before and after enforcement operations intensified. As Hargrove's testimony continued, filled with evasions and obvious contradictions, Walter watched from the gallery with a mixture of disgust and vindication. The man who had wielded such power, who had seemed untouchable just months earlier, was now reduced to transparent lies that fooled no one. When it was D.A. Hayes's turn to testify, her strategy was to portray herself as another victim, a dedicated public servant who had been misled by police officials she trusted. "I based my prosecutorial decisions on the information provided by the department," she claimed. "If that information was falsified or incomplete, I was as much a victim of this deception as anyone." The claim might have gained more traction had the prosecution not produced emails showing Hayes had actively suppressed complaints against officers involved in the conspiracy, including directing her staff to lose the paperwork on civil rights allegations. By the time Walter was recalled to the stand for additional testimony, the mood in the courtroom had shifted palpably. The defendant's denials seemed hollow against the overwhelming evidence of coordination and cover-up. Walter's final statement to the jury was brief but powerful. "All my life," he said, his voice steady and clear, "I've heard about justice being blind, that the law treats everyone equally regardless of race or wealth or power. For most of my 73 years, that seemed like a story we tell ourselves, not something real in the world I lived in." He paused, looking directly at the jury. "But being here today, seeing these people who thought themselves above accountability now answering for their actions, maybe that story can be true after all. Not perfectly, not always, but possible. That's all any of us really wanted. just the possibility of justice. When Walter stepped down from the witness stand, the courtroom remained silent for several seconds before the judge called for the next witness. Something in Walter's simple eloquence had cut through the legal complexities to the human core of the case. Even some of the defense attorneys looked momentarily discomfited, as though reminded of principles that had gotten lost in their professional advocacy. Outside the courthouse, national civil rights leaders had arrived to show support. Reverend James Mitchell, whose organization had been fighting police misconduct for decades, held an impromptu press conference, praising the courage of Walter and the other victims. "What these elders have done," Mitchell declared, "is remind us that justice requires courage. It requires ordinary people willing to stand up despite fear, despite threats, despite the weight of history telling them it's impossible." Back in Riverdale, the community continued its transformation. The suspension of the Renaissance Project had created space for a community-led planning initiative. With guidance from urban development experts, volunteering their time, residents were creating their own vision for neighborhood improvement that would preserve affordability and cultural heritage while addressing genuine needs. The police department, under interim leadership, had implemented body cameras, civilian review procedures, and enhanced training on implicit bias and de-escalation techniques. Officers aligned with the old regime were gradually being replaced by new recruits, representing the diversity of the community. As the trial progressed into its second week, Walter was approached by a young officer he didn't recognize. Instinctively tensing at the uniform, he relaxed when the officer respectfully removed his hat. "Mr. Freeman, I just wanted to say thank you. I joined the force to help people, not hurt them. What you've done is making it possible for officers like me to serve the way we always wanted to." The simple interaction represented something Walter had rarely experienced in his long life, a moment of genuine respect and recognition from someone in authority. That evening, at a community dinner organized to support the victims awaiting the verdict, Walter found himself face to face with Chief Hargrove. The encounter was brief and tense, the suspended chief approaching Walter during a lull in the proceedings. "You've destroyed everything I spent 30 years building, Hargrove," said his voice low and controlled, despite the anger evident in his eyes. Walter met his gaze steadily. "No, Chief, you destroyed it yourself. I just turned on the light so everyone could see what you were doing in the darkness." After 3 weeks of testimony and 2 days of deliberation, the jury returned to the packed courtroom. Walter sat between Marcus and Eloise, their hands linked in a chain of support as the forewoman stood to deliver the verdict. On the count of conspiracy against rights under color of law, we find the defendant Brendan Keegan guilty. A wave of murmurs swept through the courtroom. On the same count, we find the defendant Victor Hargrove guilty. One by one, the verdicts continued, a nearly unbroken string of guilty findings across all defendants and most charges. Only D.A. Hayes escaped conviction on 2 minor counts, but the major charges of obstruction of justice and conspiracy had stuck. When the judge finally dismissed the jury, Walter sat in stunned silence, tears streaming unchecked down his weathered cheeks. In his 73 years, he had never expected to witness such a moment. Powerful people being held accountable for crimes against black citizens. Marcus wrapped his arms around his grandfather's shoulders, his own eyes glistening. "You did it, Granddad. You really did it." The sentencing phase began 2 weeks later. Prosecutor Phillips argued forcefully for maximum penalties, emphasizing the betrayal of public trust inherent in the defendant's actions. "These weren't just crimes against individual victims," she told the court. "They were assaults on the very foundation of justice and equal protection under law." The defense attorneys pleaded for leniency, citing previously unblemished records and community ties. Keegan's lawyer emphasized his client's gambling addiction as a mitigating factor, while Hargrove's team presented character witnesses testifying to his decades of service. When Walter was invited to make a victim impact statement, he rose slowly from his seat, the courtroom falling silent as he approached the podium. "Your Honor, I'm not a man of many words, and I've never been one to seek revenge." He began, his voice steady, despite the emotion visible in his eyes. "What these men and women did wasn't just about the money they took from me or my neighbors. They stole our dignity. They reinforced the lesson many of us learned as children, that the system wasn't designed to protect people who look like me." Walter paused, gathering his thoughts. "But today, I'm not asking for the harshest punishment possible. I'm asking for justice that brings healing rather than more division. These defendants need to face real consequences, yes. But more importantly, the system that allowed them to operate needs to change permanently. His simple eloquence seemed to touch something in the courtroom. Even some of the defendants looked down, unable to meet his gaze. Judge Harriet Coleman nodded thoughtfully as Walter returned to his seat. 1 week later, she delivered the sentences. Keegan received 12 years in federal prison. Hargrove was sentenced to 15 years. The other defendants received sentences ranging from 5 to 10 years, with only the developer Reynolds receiving a slightly reduced sentence for his late cooperation with investigators. Beyond the prison terms, the judge ordered significant financial restitution. Each victim would receive compensation for their direct losses plus punitive damages. Additionally, a community restoration fund would be established, using assets seized from the corrupt officers and developers, a fund that would ultimately total over $20 million earmarked for infrastructure, education, and housing, assistance in the affected neighborhoods. In the aftermath of the sentencing, Walter found himself at the center of a wave of positive change. The settlement from his personal civil suit was substantial, but he had little interest in material wealth at his age. Instead, he established the Freeman Justice Scholarship for Black students pursuing law degrees with a focus on civil rights or criminal justice reform. The best protection against corruption, he explained at the scholarship announcement, is having lawyers who understand both the law and the communities they serve. Marcus was among the first recipients, though he insisted the selection had been made by an independent committee without his grandfather's involvement. His law school experience had been transformed by his participation in the case, leading to offers from several prestigious civil rights organizations upon his graduation. He ultimately chose to join Attorney Powell's expanding practice, which had received national recognition for its role in exposing the Riverdale conspiracy. The Riverdale Police Department underwent a complete restructuring under new leadership. Officer Rodriguez, whose testimony had been crucial to the prosecution, was promoted to a senior training position focused on ethical policing and community relations. A civilian oversight board was established with real investigative and disciplinary powers. Body cameras became mandatory, and a new transparency initiative made complaint data publicly accessible. Most significantly, recruitment efforts focused on building a department that reflected the diversity of the community it served. Walter was invited to address the first graduating class of the Reformed Police Academy, a moment that would have been unimaginable just a year earlier. Standing before the diverse group of recruits, many of whom were people of color, Walter spoke about the possibility of bridging historical divides. True justice isn't about punishment, he told them. It's about creating a system where every person feels equally protected and respected. You're not just enforcing laws, you're building trust that has been broken for generations. The graduates gave him a standing ovation. The Community Restoration Fund's first projects began to materialize throughout Riverdale. Streets were repaved, parks renovated, and a new health clinic opened in a previously underserved area. The community center, where Walter volunteered, received funding for a major expansion, including a dedicated space for intergenerational programs bringing seniors and youth together. Perhaps most meaningfully for Walter, a year after the trial, he was reunited with Officer Rodriguez, now Lieutenant Rodriguez, at a community policing forum. The meeting was initially awkward, both men carrying the weight of their shared history. "I wanted to thank you," Walter said, finally breaking the tension. "It couldn't have been easy to stand against your colleagues." Rodriguez shook his head. "What you did was much harder. I had a badge and a gun, and I still hesitated too long before doing the right thing. You had nothing but your word and your courage." The two men spoke for over an hour, finding unexpected common ground in their hopes for the community's future. Their conversation evolved into a regular dialogue that eventually became an official program pairing police officers with community elders for monthly discussions about neighborhood needs and concerns. As the one-year anniversary of the verdict approached, Walter drove his new car to the cemetery where Corinne was buried. Despite his many public appearances and accolades over the past year, these private visits remained his most cherished ritual. Placing a bouquet of yellow roses, her favorite, on the grave, Walter settled onto the small bench nearby. "We won this one, Corinne," he said softly, as though she were sitting beside him. "Not just for us, but for the children and grandchildren coming after. The world's still not perfect, not by a long shot, but maybe it's a little better than it was. He sat in peaceful silence for several minutes, watching the dappled sunlight play through the leaves overhead. At 74, Walter Freeman had discovered that sometimes the most revolutionary act wasn't grand or dramatic, but simply refusing to accept injustice when it would have been easier to look away. That lesson passed down to Marcus, and the countless young people who now knew his story might be his most important legacy. What would you have done in Walter's position? Would you have had the courage to stand up against corruption even when the entire system seemed stacked against you? Comment below with your thoughts. If this story of perseverance against overwhelming odds inspired you, please like this video and subscribe to our channel for more powerful stories of everyday heroes fighting for justice. Share this with someone who needs a reminder that one person's courage can truly change a community. Thank you for watching Marked Money: The Sting Operation. Remember that in the face of injustice, your voice matters more than you know. Walter Freeman's journey teaches us that age is never a barrier to standing up for justice. His story reminds us that one person's courage can unravel entire systems of corruption when they refuse to remain silent. The path of resistance is rarely easy. Walter faced threats, isolation, and health challenges, but the alternative of continued oppression is ultimately more costly. This case demonstrates how institutional racism often operates through seemingly mundane mechanisms like traffic stops and civil forfeitures, creating a web of oppression that disproportionately targets vulnerable communities. Walter's experience shows that documentation, persistence, and building alliances are crucial tools in fighting systemic injustice. Perhaps most importantly, his story illustrates that change requires both personal courage and community solidarity. When Walter stood alone, he was vulnerable, but when others joined him, from his grandson to federal agents to community members, the corrupt system could no longer sustain itself. Justice doesn't happen overnight or automatically. It demands vigilance, sacrifice, and unwavering commitment from ordinary people willing to take extraordinary stands. Have you ever witnessed injustice but felt powerless to stop it? Walter's story shows us that even one person's stand can spark transformative change. Share your thoughts in the comments. Have you ever spoken up against wrongdoing despite the risks? What gave you the courage? If this story of resilience against racist policing and corruption moved you, please hit that like button too. Help more people discover Walter's inspiring journey.